So don't think about it as an essay writing project. Think about it as a research project. It's your chance to do your own individual research. Now, for most areas of art history, you're still reliant on what other scholars have said. Of course, people may have spent their whole life working on one artist, so of course you're interested to benefit from their knowledge. You can't be expected to do new discoveries that are beyond what someone like that has already done. Although there are some topics that maybe you can be more in the front line. If you happen to be interested in local art, for instance, you could even be the first person to write about a certain local artist, actually, in any art historical way. When it comes to contemporary art, there's a load of artists actually that haven't been written about by art historians in an art historical way. Maybe there's writing about them by people who are trying to sell their work, promotional essays by commercial art galleries or something like that. Maybe there's short pieces of art criticism, reviews of their exhibition, something like that, but there may not actually be an art historian writing about them. So that there are possibilities to really do something new if you want to work on contemporary art. It's much harder if you're working on Michelangelo, even to read what other people have already said about Michelangelo would take years, and you probably have to know many different languages to read it all anyway. So it's much harder in that case. There's a wealth of art history. There are advantages and disadvantages. If you write on a topic where a lot of people have already written about, then the debate may have reached a higher level. Then it's more interesting to listen to. If you're writing about some recent artist, there may be only one or two serious people who have written about that artist's work. But it all comes down to you. So that's the main thing that you do, and it counts for the largest part of your assessment. But before we get to that is, as I say, a presentation you make in the class during the second week, the second part of the class. So that's the first public thing you'll have to do. And I'll provide a kind of schedule of who's presenting when, once I finally know who's on the course, which I won't know till the end of the ad drop period. As usual, everything is kind of fluid for the first 2 weeks, so we don't quite know, where we're standing. So once that's over, then we can think ahead. So please confirm your topic with me. You can send me an email, you can talk to me after the class. The idea is not for me to try and control your topic. I'm not interested in doing that, but I can give you advice based on my experience about what topics may work or not work, what might be a difficult or topic, maybe because you frame a topic too widely, it's going to be difficult to cover all that ground, too much reading for you to do, or maybe because you frame it a bit narrowly, or maybe it's a topic I know that you're going to have trouble getting information on that topic, something. In art history or in history in general, there are lots of really interesting topics, really interesting questions we might want to ask, but we just can't answer them because there isn't information available. There's no historical record. We'd love to know what Napoleon was thinking during the Battle of Waterloo, but sorry, we can't access his thoughts now and find out. No, we can't. Or even Michelangelo, we can't know what he was thinking, or Van Gogh or whoever. So a good question is part of it, but having the resources to answer it is another. So often you're going to be starting by doing a literature search of some kind. Find out what material there is on a particular topic. It's kind of chicken and egg, what comes first, what comes second, because as you do your reading, then your ideas will develop about what interests you. So probably in most cases people will only have a vague idea of, I'm really interested in this artist or this issue. And as they get further into the reading, they'll start to develop a clear idea of, I can maybe write on this theme or something like that. So it'll probably work like that. Trust to the process, it works if you engage with the process. You have to do the reading for it to work, though. So because I don't know how many people are in the course, I can't give you the schedule now of the presentation, but also I can't tell you exactly how long your presentations will be. That will also depend on how many people are enrolled in the end. Some people, I think, are still waiting to hear about whether they can get an internship and things like that, so we're not quite sure who will be on this course or not. It's really important to be here every week, and it's to be here on time. And it's really important to have done the reading. Every week everyone will speak, so if you haven't done the reading, it will be clear. You need to make notes on each reading. It's not going to be enough to, go through the yellow highlighter or underline a few pages or a few lines or something like that. You need to make notes. Note-taking is an important skill. By learning how to take notes, you're learning how to kind of clarify your thinking. So those notes, I'm hoping that you can submit along with your essay at the end of the course. And that will, put it this way, if your notes aren't that good, you won't lose any marks from it. But if your notes are good, you could gain like a sort of extra credit. I could bump up your essay a little bit. If it's just below a grade threshold and you've clearly done a lot of work in your notes, then that might push it up. But it won't bring you down at all. So don't write notes as if I'm looking over your shoulder. Just write them for your own benefit, but show them to me later. All the things I've said will be in the About the Course handout. And there's also this other handout on essay writing, which has general advice on how to do well in a written assignment. It's not a how-to guide, and you'll notice the first bit of advice it gives is about time management, which is really an important life skill. So in this course, you're very much pushed back to your own devices. I'm not providing you, apart from the readings which come out at you each week, I'm not going to be policing what you're doing. It's all up to you what you do, and you'll get the benefit of what you do, or not, as the case may be. So it's really up to you how you manage your time. But that really, I think, is the most valuable transferable skill you can learn, and it's the main reason why students don't get as good a grade as they could get in their work, is that they've run out of time to work on something. So apportioning your time while managing the available time you have, your time is very restricted. One thing I think I should say is a lot of students are taking on internships and part-time work that they have arranged themselves, and that can be very useful. It gives you a taste of work, helps you to learn skills, but also helps you to learn what kind of work you might want to take on if you're involved in the art field. But be careful you don't commit yourself to too much, and don't let yourself be exploited by employers who want your free or cheap labor. It may actually be a bit careful about how much time you're spending on your studies versus other things, because it may be more in your benefit to spend a bit more time on your studies now, and then that opens up more opportunities for you later on. So be very careful about all that sort of things. any questions about what I've said so far? I hope I've covered now the main points of what the course is about, and also what the assessment involves. But if there's something I haven't explained clearly, please let me know. It's quite possible. If you have a question, probably it's the same one that's in other people's heads as well, so feel free to ask it.
You've mentioned that we should write about art history. For instance, I want to choose a local Hong Kong artist.
Yeah.
Who've been working in work of arts for like 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So how should we start our plan of, or how should we start researching? Like, what kind of information do we need to collect?
Okay, well, so for a living artist, if it's a local artist, that has certain advantages, because there's more chance you can get hold of the material, more chance to see the actual work. So my first question is, can you see the work? Can you see not just the work that's being made now, maybe some recent exhibition, but can you find a way to see the earlier work? You know, if it's a local artist, you can perhaps see the actual work, not just illustrations of it, and that's really an advantage. You know, when you're in front of an actual work of art, you often notice things you just can't from an illustration, for various reasons. So access to materials, you know, maybe that different artists work in different ways, but some artists generate a lot of materials like notes and things like that. Are they going to let you look at that? Sometimes, even if they have it, they don't really want people to look at it. But if you can get access to that sort of thing, then that's really valuable. If you're talking about, I mean, what sort of an age would your artist be?
I think around 40, 50. I'm not sure.
And have they had many international exhibitions and things like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You want to, first thing you want to be sure with a living artist would be, do I really believe they're historically significant enough for me to spend that amount of my time on, you know, to write them into art history, as it were. Sometimes when an artist is at the very beginning of their career, it's unclear what their development is going to be, how significant they're going to turn out to be. There may not be enough of a kind of history of work they produce for you to get to grips with, even if it's kind of interesting. So I'd be particularly wary about that. But if you're talking about someone 40s to 50s, they're sort of mid-career maybe, if they're successful. So there may be a track record of sort of critical writing. Here in Hong Kong, maybe art criticism isn't so developed as some other places, even though the art scene is very big, the commercial art scene is very big. So you may find there's actually not that much written, but that's an opportunity in another way, as long as you have something you want to say. A question would be whether you can interview that artist. That will be a source of information that that nobody else has. If you generate an interview, all that material can be used in your essay, and it will be original primary material that has never seen the light of day before. But nowadays, in the world of electronic communication, artists are kind of overwhelmed by students wanting material on them for essays. Even local mid-career artists may be overwhelmed, by such requests. So it becomes harder. When I was a grad student, I could write to the most famous artists around, and they would write back, because hardly anyone cared about them, in terms of writing.
I tried to contact that artist before, and he's willing to have an interview.
Okay. Okay.
The time wasn't.
Yeah.
Kind of
Well, one thing you should do, if you're going to interview an artist, you really should be sure that you have already read everything that's in the public domain, including other interviews that are online or printed, whatever. Make sure you're on top of all the material. Actually, this is a kind of ideal point to reach in any study. You know, you want to know what has already been written about an artist, and then it's only at that point you know if the thought you have is a new thought. Actually, no one's ever talked about this, you know. I say it's the ideal point to read because, as I said before, if you're writing on Michelangelo, sorry, you know, in the space of one course, you're never going to have the time to read all that material anyway. But ideally, that's what you want to. And in the case of a living artist, one should hope, a local living artist, one should hope one could read everything that's been written. So you aren't in an interview asking the same old time questions that they've heard so many times, and they start to get a bit annoyed that you haven't done your homework. Why am I answering again to you? You could have just read what I already said before. So you don't want to get into that situation. And you don't want to get in a situation where you're trying to get an artist to do the art history for you. You're the art historian, you know. What the artist can tell you is just their opinion. They're only an artist. They're not the art historian. You know, you don't ask Napoleon, well, what was the meaning of the Battle of Waterloo? What was its historical significance, you know? And what were the main causes of the Napoleonic War, you know? Even if he's got an answer, you can't trust his answer because he's speaking from his point of view. And a lot of artists like to convey not all artists, but a lot of artists like to convey the impression that basically they're their own mother and father. They give birth to themselves. They're not influenced by anyone at all. You know, everything they do is completely original. But you as an art historian may take a different view. You might see something there. So you don't ask them to do your job. Otherwise, you're not going to get good answers anyway. You know, I've interviewed an artist, and then in that artist's answers, I heard him telling me what I know was written in a certain book about him. You know, otherwise he's internalized what art historians have said about him, and then he's telling it back to me. So, you know, a good artist may not be a good talker. That's not their job, you know. Like the dancer Isadora Duncan, someone asked her what her dance means. She says, if I could put it into words, I wouldn't have to dance it, you know. It would be simpler just to tell you. So usually it's much more successful with an interview with an artist if you can focus them on the art itself. You know, maybe you have props, you have the images, and say, what about this here, and why did you do, you know? And then an artist can always respond on that level. Don't ask them to be an interpreter or whatever. You know, or you can ask them factual questions. So, you know, was this done while you were a student at Chinese university, or you know, were there other students that you were part of a group with? You try to learn their social circle. The kind of questions you ask, and this goes back to the nature of this course, the kind of questions you ask depends on your methodology, what kind of an art historian you are. You may even be the kind of art historian who thinks that you can't learn very much from artists anyway. You know, what they say isn't the important thing. I'm more interested in the, you know, what was happening in the socio-political environment in Hong Kong at that time, or something like that. You know, this was an artwork made in 1997. Oh, baby, it's something to do with the handover. It's somehow conditioned by the handover, even if the artist doesn't say so. So it depends on your whole approach.
So I can, like, when I look at one work of art, maybe he's trying to say it's just for fun, but I can see something political.
Your interpretation will be your interpretation, but you may not bring that up in the, you know, you can say certain things to artists and you could offend them, or, you know, they don't want to be put in a certain box or something like that. So your interpretation may come later. You don't keep an open mind anyway, but I think they will generally be a bit worried if you try and put them in a box. So the questions should be ones that you really need the answer to. Genuinely, you're interested to hear the answer to.
But I can put my interpretation in my essays or something.
Well, in your essay, yeah. I mean, usually it's best to ask kind of open-ended questions that don't have a certain assumption built into them. And that actually applies to whether you're working on interviewing living artists or any kind of topic. What you're actually looking for is a research question for your essay, not so much a topic as a question. And it's much better if it's an open-ended question, a question that could, whatever the answer is what it is. You know, it doesn't have an assumption built into it. Like what would be? Let me give a kind of an absurd example. You know, I'm going to investigate when you last travelled to the moon. Okay, I've done lots of work on this, and then at the last minute I discover, oh, actually she didn't travel to the moon. You know, so the whole project collapsed. I built an assumption into my question that is wrong. So you want a kind of open-ended question like, I'm going to investigate where you've travelled to, you know, if anywhere. And if nowhere, oh, that's also interesting, you know, that, you know, not everyone travels, and, you know, how did that work out? Is it actually better not to travel? Do you have specific reasons not to travel? Are there, you know, is it a general problem that students don't have enough money to travel, or do they all go to Taiwan nowadays? Why is that? Why is Taiwan so popular among Hong Kong people? You know, all sorts of, you know, you find out what you find out, and it's open-ended. You don't think you know what you're going to find before you start your project. Otherwise, it's not really worth doing. If you know the answer, why is it worth doing? So it's got to be kind of like a big enough question that it's worth looking into. Same with a question asking an artist. You've got to really be interested in having the answer, and it should be not something that you think you know the answer. Well, actually, you can ask questions that you think you know the answer to. It could be a bit like interviewing a policeman interviewing criminals. Maybe they catch two criminals, they separate them to two different rooms, interview the one, interview the other. Maybe they ask them the same question and see if they get the same answer. So certainly I've done that when I've been interviewing artists. You cross-reference, you know, well, what did that one say? The other one said that, you know, and you find information that way. Memory is not something that's very reliable necessarily. That's another thing when you're interviewing. You need to you correlate what people have said in an interview with textual sources as much as possible. You can't trust textual sources either. For example, I came across some information about an exhibition that I participated in Shenzhen. I saw my name on the list of people in that exhibition. But I was never part of that exhibition. You know, it's just not correct. Or people just can't remember, you know. Actually, I have an art project I'm doing at the moment where I'm collecting people's memories of one day in history. And that day is the 31st of June, 1997. But actually there are only 30 days in June. But nevertheless, I've collected a lot of memories about that day. And also I found a lot of material on the web about things that happened that day. So, you know, you can't be sure about any factual information that you may, you know, you always got to cross-reference things. Be skeptical. Be like a kind of detective who is, you know, not trusting of anything that is heard. treat artists as an interested party. And of course, it's not just artists you might want to interview. You might want to interview collectors of their work. You might want to interview other people from their social circle, other artists who studied with them at the same time. They may give people from another position, they can give you useful information too, maybe even more useful information sometimes. Any other questions about approach? It's more interesting. There are lots and lots of different approaches you can take. Maybe some of you even know now a topic that you'd always like to work on or something like that. Don't jump too quickly to your deciding your topic. That's one advice I would give. Read around, and sometimes the first thought is not the best thought. You think, yeah.
Is it possible to really think and come up with a topic instead as what she said on a particular artist? But what if we want to emphasize and place on the top on a particular ideology or a particular set of beliefs? Like, for example, if, let's say I'm thinking or really considering a topic which quite fascinates me, which is quite controversial, which is associated and related to depictions of legitimacy for European colonialism in the 19th century. Is that one which can be considered?
Okay, remember you're looking for a question, really, an issue.
Like how arts of the artists at the time really are meant to, for example,
Yeah.
reflect like this sort of sense of legitimization to settle, to colonize, to rule.
Okay.
Using in representations.
Remember what I said about be very careful you don't build in too many assumptions into your question. That's a potential danger with a kind of a more conceptual question, that you can have a lot of assumptions built into it, which later, as you go further into it, you find those assumptions collapse. If the closer you stay to concrete works of art, the concrete work of art is there and it's going to be what it is, and you can always find another angle to approach it. But if you're and that's a kind of firm foundation in that sense. It's never going to let you down. You always find one other way of looking at, the Sistine Chapel ceiling or something like that. But if you are starting from a conceptual thing, it's something kind of not grounded in quite the same way. So you better be sure that the conceptual assumptions built into the questions are one that you feel sure about, or try to reduce them as much as possible and make it as much a kind of more empirical, open-ended question. Then it's likely to go well. So, and I think another danger with that kind of question is that it could involve you. There could be many, many artists that could fit that kind of issue. So you might want to kind of narrow it down to just look at one test case. I'm just going to look at this one artist and see how those issues can be clarified in relation to one artist's work. I'm not really wanting to say you have to work on one artist. You could work on a theme.
Can I emphasize and focus on, for example, just one particular location, like a place which I'm thinking or really considering is this very notorious and this very gruesome state or country, like for example, have you heard of what the Congo Free State is by Belgium?
Yes.
Like Belgians took the Congo region and
Yes.
they sort of like
Yeah.
the economy prospered, but it was an expensive.
Okay. Okay.
Like,
So one place is one. That's one way of narrowing it down. That's good. That gives you one specific context that you have to read up about, and that makes it more manageable. An important consideration is getting something of the right scale, not something that's so big you'll never be able. I mean, some projects are great projects, but you have to spend 5 years to do it, or you have to spend a lifetime to do it. Other projects are great projects, but you just need to spend half an hour doing it. You want something that's bigger than the latter and smaller than the other, something of the right scale. So bear that in mind as a thought. I would still say if it was me, my first question would be, what are the artists I would be looking at? What is the visual material I'd be looking at? And I would personally, I would want to have some interest in that visual material. You use the word reflect. You talk about artists reflecting the ideology. Often it's more interesting if the artists are doing more than simply reflecting the society of the time. If they're sort of good enough as an artist, somehow they're actors in the drama themselves. They're not just reflecting what's happening, but they're helping determine what's happening, or somehow that image was the one that galvanized people to,
bring sort of sense of sympathy.
Yeah. Like it could even be, doesn't have to be artistic images. It could be news photography, for instance. That picture of that massacre was the one that caused, etc., etc. So, any more about this?
No, it's just I thought, okay, to believe, I think this one is quite controversial and particularly interesting because from what is said in the outline, we'll mostly focus and emphasize on the time period of the 19th and 20th century. But because I was thinking about this issue for quite a time, especially after watching a film in cinema about the topic, Tarzan, which took place in the Belgian Congo, I was thinking, is it all right and is it acceptable to maybe choose something you're unliking instead of like what it's based on? Like, can it be like beyond what is being set on the timetable?
Well, in about the course handout, I mentioned that the readings may focus a little bit more on that time period, but I really want to emphasize that your essay could be on absolutely any time period and cultural situation. But you need to feel sure that you have enough material. The problem with somewhere like working on the Congo, is there going to be enough material you can work with that's available to you here in Hong Kong? So that would probably be one of the first questions I'd want to do, to look into. Have I got enough material I can work with? And is there enough visual material that is interesting in its own right to work with? That would be the first sort of questions to ask. Any other thoughts? As you work on this project, if you have individual questions, just talk to me after the class or send me an email. I try to help you. We have some space for a bit of dialogue. Anything else about the course or about the assignments?